This is the story of a world where the Catris, apex predators of Solaris 4, hunted without fear, erasing entire villages overnight. No one thought they could be stopped. No one, except one man, an exile armed with nothing but his mind, his scars, and sheer grit. This is the story of how a single human turned the galaxy's deadliest hunters into his prey, and made even the aliens who feared the Catris whisper his name in awe and terror. As dawn rose over Solaris 4, pale light spread across valleys where twisted trees met jagged cliffs. Heat shimmered in the air, and faint glowing mists rose from pools where locals dared not go. These were the Catris' domain, packs of silent, camouflaged predators. They moved like shadows, thinking as one, able to wipe out entire villages overnight. But now, something had changed. 2 weeks ago, a pack of 7 Catris, notorious for decimating entire settlements, vanished without a trace. Their territory, once marked with clawed trees and torn carcasses, had grown silent. Then another pack disappeared, and another. It was unthinkable. These were the apex predators of the continent. The Council of Elders convened under the great black stone pillars of Dathrine to discuss the disappearances. Warriors, scouts, even the most revered of the hunt leaders argued endlessly. But none dared approach the ravines of the southern ranges, where the Catris had ruled. None except for one. Keller Trask had been an outcast for years now. The locals called him the Exile, a man forced into the wilds after what was called the Incident, a surgical procedure gone wrong on one of the elders' offspring. They said he'd mutilated the youngling, but none of them knew the truth of it. The truth was buried under layers of shame and silence, and no one wanted to hear explanations. Keller's medical skills, honed over decades as a veterinarian on a dozen frontier worlds, were reduced to patching up wounded gliders and stray hunting beasts. No one expected him to last more than a few days in the wilds beyond Dathrine, yet somehow, he'd survived. The first inkling that Keller was still alive came when a trio of scouts sent to retrieve artifacts from the abandoned Hunter's Lodge reported seeing strange patterns etched into the dirt. Footprints too small to be Catris, but too deliberate to be anything else. There were devices, traps, alien to their knowledge, clearly human-made. And there were Catris remains, their twisted forms crushed or mangled in ways no natural predator could manage. Zephyr, a seasoned hunter with silver-streaked skin and a thick mane of black braids, led a band of 8 warriors into the southern ravines to investigate. They found the remnants of the first trap at dusk, a tensioned net of metallic fibers strung between the trunks of twisted gnarls, camouflaged with leaves and dirt. One of Zethyr's crew poked it with a spear, and the net snapped upward with a force that sent the spear hurtling 20 feet into the air. Who would set such a thing? Zathor murmured, his voice hoarse. Humans, one of the warriors said, shivering despite the heat. Or just one, the Exile. Zethar snorted but said nothing more. That night they made camp, wary of every sound. The next morning, half their supplies were gone. The sentries swore they hadn't seen a thing. One even bore a fresh gash across his arm. It was the Catris, he insisted. But no Catris would have taken supplies or left a warning wound instead of a kill. A week passed. Then another pack disappeared. This one had been the largest, known for wiping out entire colonies in the western uplands. Their territory was eerily silent. Zephyr returned to Dathrine with tales of traps, twisted remnants of Catris, and the signs of a lone human mind working with surgical precision. The council was thrown into disarray. Some whispered of strange magics, others spoke of human stubbornness, but the whispers spread like wildfire. The Exile was turning the Catris into prey. Keller knew the land well. His exile hadn't broken him. It had sharpened his mind. In the early weeks, he'd survived by observation, watching the Catris from afar, learning their hunting patterns, their blind spots. His veterinary skills were a lifeline, and his trap-making expertise came from decades of improvising snares on Earth and other human colonies. His tools were primitive, repurposed medical clamps, wires stripped from abandoned comm units, adhesives made from local resins, but he knew enough to slow the Catris, to wound them in ways that disrupted the pack's cohesion. The first real kill had come when he noticed a Catrice limping from a sprained limb. He'd tracked it to a den, waited for the others to sleep, and used a crude weighted spear to pin it against the rocky wall. The creature had thrashed, but he'd approached with calculated caution, disabling it with a makeshift sedative brewed from local flora. His hands trembled the whole time. He was no hunter, just a man with a plan and too much at stake. The next day he set a perimeter of traps, using the Catris's own fear scent to bait others into them. But Keller wasn't without injuries. One trap backfired on him when a tension line snapped and caught his arm. He'd barely managed to stitch the gash, trembling with shock and fever for days. It was a slow, agonizing recovery, with makeshift splints made from twisted branches and bindings cut from his own clothing. He'd learned to sleep lightly, waking at every sound, every shift in the wind. His body ached from hunger, his skin burned from the relentless suns, but he pushed on. The locals started whispering louder. Stories spread through the settlements of a human who had become the terror of the predators. They described him as a shadow in the wilds, using strange weapons and mind tricks to turn the hunters into prey. Some spoke of him as a ghost, a wraith who moved unseen. But others, particularly the old warriors like Zether, knew it was something else. The council debated sending a larger hunting party to find him, but none dared to venture into the southern ravines after the last disappearance. The Catris packs were vanishing, and even the bravest warriors feared what they might find. And in the silence of the ravines, Keller worked by firelight, his hands steady as he carved another trap trigger. His breath was shallow, his ribs still sore from a fall the week before. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and stared out into the darkness beyond the fire's glow. In the distance, faint shapes moved, silent, predatory, watching. But they no longer closed in, they no longer hunted. Because now they feared. And Keller, the exile, was ready for whatever came next. The third week marked a turning point. Where once the ravines had echoed with the Catris's predatory wails, now they fell into uneasy silence. Even the nocturnal insects seemed to hush their songs, and the glimmering eyes from the cliffs no longer gleamed with unchallenged hunger. Keller's traps had grown more sophisticated, blending seamlessly into the environment, a snare anchored with twisted vines, pressure plates built from hollowed stones and bracing branches. He'd refined his sedatives too, adjusting dosages to account for the predator's resilience. He wasn't just disabling them, he was studying them, adapting his approach as he learned the peculiarities of their physiology. He'd found that the Catris had a vulnerability around their rear limbs, where nerve clusters ran close to the surface. A precise puncture there could render a leg useless, breaking the pack's coordination. But this wasn't a theory Keller pulled from thin air. His knowledge came from long nights of observation, from patient recording of behaviors, from dissecting the remains of those he'd managed to bring down. It wasn't glamorous work. It was meticulous, grueling, and left him often trembling with exhaustion. One evening, after resetting a ground snare deep in the western cliffs, he felt a sharp crack underfoot. His ankle twisted violently, sending him sprawling into the dust. Pain shot through his leg, sharp and immediate. He bit back a cry, crawling toward a crevice where he could wedge himself for safety. Only when he'd splinted the ankle with a branch and cloth from his shirt did he allow himself to breathe through the pain. His hands trembled as he secured the splint, the ankle swelling with angry heat. There was no ignoring the injury. Walking was out of the question for the next few days, and crawling between his shelters and traps was agonizingly slow. He rationed his food and water, reducing himself to sips and mouthfuls. By the fourth day, the swelling began to recede slightly, but he knew full weight-bearing wouldn't be possible for at least another 2 weeks. He tore strips from his bedding to fashion crude crutches, though they dug painfully into his armpits and made travel a precarious balancing act. Meanwhile, word spread through the settlements, not just of Catris disappearing, but of strange signals captured by remote sensors in the ravines. high-frequency bursts too rhythmic to be natural, yet too irregular to be mechanical. Some elders theorized it was the humans signaling for reinforcements. Others feared he was summoning even worse creatures. A scouting party, more cautious than Zethers, ventured into the outskirts of the ravines. They found not Keller, but remnants of his work, bone-laden traps, shredded terrain where Catras had struggled and failed, and human tracks leading deeper into the wilds. One scout reported seeing Keller briefly, his silhouette against the dusk, limping heavily but still moving with determination. He looked thin, the scout murmured upon return. Thin and hollow-eyed, but he didn't stop, just kept moving like he was part of the land. The council convened again, this time in a state of near panic. If one human could turn the balance of power, what would happen if more arrived? Could they adapt to the predators faster than even the Catras adapted to hunting? The council sent messengers to the northern settlements asking for volunteers skilled in tracking and trapping to form a rescue or containment party. But no one came forward. In his makeshift shelter, Keller nursed his ankle by soaking it in cool, mineral-rich pools and massaging the joint to keep the stiffness at bay. The pain lingered, sharp when he put any weight on it, but he could shuffle short distances now with the crutches. It was slow, agonizing progress, yet he kept his mind sharp, planning his next steps. He couldn't stay in one place long, or the Catras, if any were left, would circle back. Then one night, just as he was drifting into uneasy sleep, a new sound sliced through the stillness. Not the familiar growls of the Catras, but a high, keening wail. A distress cry, alien yet unmistakably terrified. He forced himself upright, heart pounding. The sound repeated, closer this time. Against reason, against his body's protests, he hobbled toward the source, dragging a net trap behind him as insurance. Near a dry stream bed, he found it. A lone, juvenile Catras, its rear leg mangled in a natural rockfall. The creature thrashed helplessly, eyes wide with fear and pain. Keller hesitated, knowing full well this was an opportunity as much as a danger. He approached slowly, soothingly, speaking in low murmurs, as he did with injured earth animals. The creature's struggle slowed, though it continued to tremble. "Easy," he whispered, easing a sedative dart into the creature's exposed flank. "You're not the enemy right now." It took a long, tense minute for the Catras to slump into unconsciousness. Only then did Keller inspect the injuries, realizing the leg was broken cleanly but not beyond repair. The irony wasn't lost on him, a predator trapped by nature itself, just as he'd been. He used strips of his remaining fabric and stiff branches to splint the limb, wrapping it securely. He sat back, exhausted, watching the creature's labored breathing. "You and me both, huh?" he muttered. He stayed there until dawn, listening to the valley's silence. For the first time in weeks, the Catras didn't seem like monsters. They were just survivors, as vulnerable to missteps and accidents as he was. When the juvenile stirred, it didn't flee. It stood on its trembling 3 legs, sniffed the air cautiously, and limped off into the shadows. Keller didn't follow. He leaned back against the rock, breathing heavily, letting the first rays of dawn warm his face. And high on the cliffs above, unseen by either man or beast, a pair of golden eyes watched from the shadows. By the 5th week, Keller's ankle had improved enough for him to manage slow, uneven steps without the crutches, though every movement sent a dull ache spiraling up his leg. The bone wasn't fully healed. It would take several more weeks for the swelling to vanish completely, but it held his weight. He still favored it, avoiding uneven ground and moving cautiously through the ravine. The break had taught him hard lessons: caution, planning, and the need for patience. But while he recovered, the dynamics of the land shifted. The juvenile Catras he'd splinted had returned, limping less but shadowing his movements from a distance. Keller noticed the tracks first, light, tentative impressions in the dust. Then, glimpses in the half-light as the creature mirrored his steps along cliff edges and behind outcroppings. It wasn't hunting him, it was following. The idea was absurd, but his instincts told him it was true. The young cateress wasn't part of a pack anymore, and perhaps in its own alien way, it had come to see him as something else, an anomaly, a fixture in the landscape rather than prey. The presence of this unexpected shadow unsettled Keller more than the idea of a whole pack hunting him. He wasn't a beast tamer, and he had no illusions about loyalty or trust. He set more traps, this time further out, recalibrating their triggers to catch not just cateress but the smaller scavengers that might reveal his position. He knew the council above the cliffs would be watching, and he was determined to stay 3 steps ahead. Meanwhile, the settlements fell into deeper unrest. Trade caravans skirting the southern ravines reported finding claw-marked signs warning of the exiles' territory. Locals believed these were left by the remaining Catrice packs, but some scouts argued the markings were far too precise, almost deliberate, as if someone was placing them to dissuade entry. Rumors grew wilder. Keller wasn't just surviving, he was controlling the predators, manipulating them with alien techniques, maybe even leading them. Zephyr, having seen Keller's handiwork firsthand, was sent back into the ravines with a larger, heavily armed party. They carried weapons modified for close-range encounters and sensor equipment adapted to detect human thermal signatures. Their mission wasn't to negotiate, it was to capture or, if necessary, eliminate the exile. On the second day of their search, the team encountered a trap that nearly crushed one of their number. A weighted log released by a cunningly balanced triplin. They disarmed 2 more snares within the next hour, each more intricate than the last. Frustration mounted. They called for Zephyr, who stood brooding beneath the cliffs, eyeing the setting sun. "This is not the work of a simple exile," one of the younger warriors said, tightening the grip on his weapon. "This is a master of the hunt." Zephyr spat into the dust, or a desperate man. That night, as Zethir's team made camp under the stars, Keller struck. He hadn't come to kill, but to send a message. Using knowledge gleaned from the catcher's scent-marking behavior, he painted the edges of their camp with a pheromone, concocted from the glands of the creatures he'd dissected. It wasn't detectable to human senses, but to any catcheress in the area, it would smell like an invasion of rivals. Keller retreated to a high vantage point, leaning heavily against a stone outcrop, watching the scene unfold. At midnight, the cateress came. Not a full pack, but a splintered group. 3 strong adults, drawn by the scent of a competing pack. They descended upon Zethyr's camp with terrifying speed, tearing through supply caches and scattering the warriors. Chaos erupted. Zethyr's men fired pulse bolts, the air filled with the acrid scent of scorched fur and metal, but the predators were gone before they could land a decisive hit. By dawn, Zethyr's team was in disarray. 2 members injured, one with a deep gash in the thigh, another with a shattered arm from a fall during the ambush. The council's orders were clear: retreat and report. Keller watched them go, his heart heavy. He hadn't intended for anyone to get hurt, but he knew the price of territory disputes and desperation. For the next few days, he focused on consolidating his position. He dismantled his older traps, leaving no traces of his presence, and shifted his base of operations deeper into the ravine system. The juvenile Catrice continued to shadow him, now bold enough to approach within a dozen feet when he rested. Keller couldn't decide whether the creature was curious or simply lonely, but he accepted its presence cautiously. One morning, while inspecting a perimeter snare, Keller discovered something alarming: a human-made drone, its casing cracked and sensors deactivated, half buried in the dirt. It wasn't his. Someone, likely from the settlements, had been surveilling the ravines. If they were using drones, it meant they were escalating. He gathered the remains, disassembling what he could for parts, and buried the rest. The incident confirmed what he'd suspected. The council was preparing to move against him in earnest. His actions had frightened them, and they were responding with increased force. He didn't blame them. He understood fear, understood survival. But if they cornered him, if they came with weapons and intent, he'd have to make a choice. The next day, as Keller reinforced a hidden tunnel with scavenged supports, a faint, familiar sound reached his ears. The whir of a drone, higher this time, more distant. He froze, muscles tensed. The juvenile catress nearby let out a low growl and slunk back into the shadows. Keller exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of inevitability settling on his shoulders. The council wasn't going to let this end quietly. But neither was he. The drone's departure left an empty hush over the ravines. Keller remained motionless behind the jagged boulder, heart pounding, sweat tracing slow lines down his back. The juvenile catress, still close by, shifted nervously. Its sleek body, once a symbol of unchallenged dominance, now seemed almost hesitant, watchful of the sky more than the man nearby. For days after the drone sighting, Keller moved with a renewed wariness. His ankle throbbed with every step, but he forced himself through the ache, stretching it carefully each morning, testing his limits. It wasn't fully healed and wouldn't be for weeks yet, but he was mobile, and that mattered now more than ever. He couldn't miss the signs. The scattered claw marks at the fringes of the ravine weren't natural, nor were the careful arrangements of stones near the old catrice dens. They were markers, left by the council's scouts to map his movements, like a silent tightening noose. Keller found fresh footprints too, human ones, cautious but deliberate. They were closing in. One evening, while setting a final line of tripwires, he noticed the juvenile catrice had returned to his camp. It wasn't hiding in the shadows this time. Instead, it stood at the edge of the firelight, limping but resolute. Its fractured limb, though no longer splinted, bore scars of its earlier injury. Keller found himself watching the creature with a strange, quiet understanding. They were both survivors now, cast adrift from their own worlds and forced to adapt. Keller crouched, speaking softly. "You should go," he murmured. "When they come, they'll come hard. I don't know if I'll be able to stop them." The creature blinked, its slit-pupilled eyes reflecting the flames. It made no move to leave. The next morning, Keller woke to the low hum of skimmers overhead. The council had made their decision. His traps were still in place, but he didn't spring them. He knew they'd be expecting resistance. Instead, he packed a satchel, medical supplies, water, protein packs, and his few remaining tools. With a deliberate slowness, he limped up the cragged path to a clearing where the skimmers would likely land. By midday, the council's forces arrived. 3 skimmers in total, each carrying warriors in reinforced armor, weapons gleaming under the twin suns. Zephyr stood at the front of the lead group, his stance rigid, his expression unreadable. Keller stood at the edge of the clearing, hands visible, showing he held no weapons. "I'm done running," he called out, his voice raw from days of silence. Zephyr approached slowly, flanked by 2 others. "You've given us quite the problem," he said. "The catrice are in disarray. Half their pack's gone, the rest scattered. Some think you're a threat to the balance." "I never wanted to be part of your balance," Keller replied quietly. "I just wanted to survive." Zethyr's gaze shifted toward the ravines. "You've killed what most of us feared to face. Even the council is divided now. They didn't expect you to last. They definitely didn't expect the catrice to turn back from you." Keller inhaled, steadying himself against the pull of gravity and pain in his ankle. "The catrice didn't turn back because of me. They turned because I made them see fear. The same fear you feel now when you realize someone you cast out can fight back harder than you thought possible." The warriors shifted uncomfortably. Zethyr's face remained stoic. "So what now? You're outnumbered. We can take you by force, or you can come back with us and explain yourself to the council." Keller's shoulders tensed. He knew what explaining himself would entail, being paraded as either a scapegoat or a war asset. Neither option sat well, but there was one thing left. Before he could speak, the juvenile catrice emerged from the tree line, its head low, body tense but unafraid. The warriors immediately raised their weapons, but Keller stepped forward sharply. "Stop," he said, his voice cracking but firm. "This one isn't a threat." Zethyr's eyes narrowed. "That's one of the predators. You can't—" "I didn't train it," Keller interrupted. "I healed it. It followed me after. It's alone, just like I was. And now it stands here, unarmed, just like me. If you fire on it, you're proving my point, that you don't understand what fear and survival really mean. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The wind stirred dust across the clearing. Finally, Zetir lowered his weapon. One by one, the others followed suit. The Catress hesitated, then limped closer to Keller's side, standing almost shoulder to shoulder with him. Zetir exhaled slowly. You've changed things, Exile. The Council won't like it, but they'll have to face it. The Catrice aren't invincible, and neither are we. But you... He glanced at Keller's thin frame, the still healing ankle. You've proven something none of us expected. You turned the hunters into prey, not with strength but with knowledge, patience, and sheer stubbornness. Keller allowed himself a faint, tired smile. That's all I had left. Zetir gestured toward one of the skimmers. We'll take you back to the Council, but this time it won't be as an exile. It'll be as a man who changed the rules. Keller hesitated, glancing at the Catress by his side. The creature shifted, its eyes reflecting dawn's light. Will it be safe? Keller asked quietly. Zetir considered, then nodded. It's earned a chance, just like you. With a deep breath, Keller stepped toward the skimmer. His ankle protested with each movement, but he didn't waver. The Catress followed, limping at his side. As they approached the ship, the warriors parted, making way for man and beast. Keller climbed aboard, settling into a seat as the engines hummed to life. The juvenile predator crouched nearby, eyes wary but calm. As the skimmer lifted off, leaving the ravines behind, Keller glanced out the viewport. The twisted groves and cragged cliffs faded into the distance. He felt a strange ache in his chest. Not loss, but a quiet acceptance. For the first time in weeks, the weight of constant survival lifted. He wasn't sure what awaited him at the Council's halls, but he knew one thing. He'd faced the worst this world had to offer and endured. Not because he was stronger or faster, but because he'd refused to give up. As the skimmer banked toward the rising suns, Keller allowed himself to relax, feeling the tension seep from his muscles. The Catrice settled beside him, its breathing slow and even. Together they left behind the wilds where the predators had once ruled, and for the first time, neither man nor beast felt alone.